Check, 1, 2. Okay. You may never leave. Okay, turn it up. Hi, everybody. Hi. Very neighborly. Right. So, I see. I'm sorry, we gave you a really bum slot. Competing with Dan Kaminsky, but everyone who's ever seen any of his talks actually knows that the entire Dan Kaminsky talk can usually be summed up in one sentence: the internet is buggered, or more crudely, the internet is fucked. So this is likely to be much more interesting because this is actually about building something as opposed to just pointing out that everything's broken like this. Ha ha. So it's my pleasure to introduce Timon Shep. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Fine,
who will be talking about building, is this wireless utopia?
Yeah.
See, anyone who uses the word utopia in my book actually is extremely dangerous because utopia, as we all know, was in fact actually an idea of hell. But anyway, without further ado, to it.
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying as well. Hi, everybody. Timon Shep. I work for the netneat.org Foundation, a Utrecht-based foundation that promotes wireless media, art, and public space. But I'll tell you a bit more about myself in a bit. I've tried to put as many images in this as I could because I really enjoy that. And I know this lecture is less nerdy than the other ones, but I promise that after a little bit of a wonky introduction and a wonky outro, in the middle there will be some very good nerdiness. All right, I'm a galaxy explorer. I'm Timon Shep. I was born in 1981. My dad's a vet. My mom's a masseuse, kind of. No, not a masseuse, what you call it. Professional masseuse kind of person. This is my dad, and that's me. And already you can see that the focus is truly on technology, as it would be for the rest of my life. That's me playing chess in Barcelona. I remember this guy totally kicking my ass, but he was very kind about it, so he kept helping me out. Sorry? Yeah, exactly. The more observant of you will see that I'm actually really getting my ass kicked. Yeah, definitely. I probably should. He probably kicked my ass by this time. He probably said, sorry. And when I was about 18, I went to England and I did something which was really a good decision. I was very much a technical guy, very much a beta guy, and I decided to study psychology and sociology for a year. And that was really an eye-opener. That was really a good thing to do because it really taught me a lot about society and people, and kind of gave me the interest to look at that. I also really love to travel, but who doesn't? But recently I was in Nigeria, and that was really quite something. I'm always amazed by how many people there are in this world. You leave one of those cities in the airplane, and you're like, damn, those people will continue to hustle and bustle even when I'm back home in the other hustle and bustle. And my life is also a lot about faith. I was brought up religiously, although I'm now an atheist. But I do find in myself this need for faith strongly. And I think I'm not the only one, and this lecture will actually revolve around this word in a way. Here we go. This lecture is also a lot about the future, really. Ubiquitous computing is still something that we're, in a way, waiting for, that's in the future. And I find that the future is very much a question of faith. It really is what you believe in, because we honestly don't know, but you kind of want to have a picture of it. You have to believe in something, right? And for me, as a nerd, this was it. I didn't believe in God anymore, so I changed to Star Trek. That's a great idea. Like, people finally made a better world themselves. It's a man-made heaven. And a very important thing that I find in all this is losing my faith and things like that is I really don't want to fool myself. That's one of the most important things in my life. I always wonder, what can I believe in? And what is true? And can I have hope? So I think about the future a lot. You know, will we be okay? And is hope viable? That's always very much something that kind of I try to find something between good and bad hope. Good hope is the hope that is true, that's reliable, that's something that we may have. And bad hope is the one that tries to steer us off the correct path. So it's kind of you're like a little ship in between dreams and optimism and pessimism and sobriety. I try to think of, society going well, but there's so much that's really going wrong. Like one of the things that going to England and studying psychology for a year was really shook my faith in mankind. When you read about Stanley Milgram's prison experiments, where people will shock someone to death, literally, well, not literally, it wasn't an experiment, so it was fake, but they were willing to shock someone to death because someone in a lab coat said so. It really makes you question our ability to create this world around us. And of course, there's a lot of, it's not the only problem we have. There's many problems like, this is what people eat in a week. On the top left, you find an American family, and on the top right, an African family. And it's quite a difference. Of course, there's, environmental problems and oil problems. Are we only going downhill from here? Have we used up most of the oil? Who knows? But it's scary stuff. I always think about Carl Sagan, who said, who called Earth Spaceship Earth, which really brought home this idea that we're all in this together, and it's the only spaceship we've got, really. But then again, I also enjoy watching very populist documentaries such as this, which is about one which is recently aired in America, which was a whole narrative about how Earth was going to end by the year 2100, how society would collapse with all these problems. So we do have a lot of problems, it seems. And can we fix those? Is it even possible? And I find that probably in a festival such as this, a lot of people will say technology. Technology is widely perceived as something that can fix things. Technology solves problems. And I wonder to what extent technology can solve problems. And going back to my idea of what can we believe in, to what extent can I believe this? What technology do I find viable as something that will save the Earth and what doesn't? So I find, what is the problem? I've tried to put it in one sentence. It's to comfortably and happily live together for as long as possible. So with many people with a high possible comfort level for as long as possible. So can technology do this? That's a big question. As a media theorist, as a media philosopher, my first step would be to try to understand it, try to understand humanity, and try to understand our past and see if we can kind of see where it's going from there. Hey, an image is gone here. Anyway, this is part one, the history of the future, in which I'll try to go on a bit about how I think we can look at nerd history and how we can perceive nerdiness. And of course, in the beginning, we were a very religious nation, probably. We all remember images of the Dark Ages, and they're not exactly happy times. But at a certain time, we got enlightened, and modernity started. And this is very much an era in which we no longer believe that God is the force that steers us in a certain direction, but we ourselves are capable of this this change. We are the ones who have our own fate in our own hands, of course, with some scary possibilities. One of the biggest groups that believed this were the hippies. I'm trying to jump ahead a little bit. They really were all about changing society, and they believed that they could. But in 1968, at the Battle for People's Park in America, there was a big argument there over a park where a lot of hippies had planted beautiful plants, but this wasn't really allowed. It was near the university grounds, and the police. It became this big thing where the president said, "Oh, you don't go there anymore. We're going to remove the plants," and the whole thing just escalated out of control. And in the end, a few bystanders and a few students got shot, and this was really a pivotal moment in my understanding of our culture, of our Western culture, where for hippies it really became very clear that this was the point, that the stage couldn't really be overturned, that there was a limit to how much you could change society in a political or peaceful way. So this is really the end song, really, of the hippie movement, where where you see them going in different directions from then on. For instance, in marketing terms, you have the inner directed, which kind of evolved from there on, which are the hippies that say, well, if we can't change society, what if we all change ourselves? If enough of us do that, then the world also becomes a better place. And these later lead to become very much a start of a more egotistical time in a way, a more individualist era, as you could say. There's also some hippies who say, let's go for corporate change. In the 70s, there were a number of hippies who said, well, where is the power? The power is with companies. So we'll start companies, or we'll become CEOs. We'll change companies from the inside, and then we'll change the world through that. They later become the yuppies, in a sense. They kind of lose their ideology and become mixed up in this corporate world. And then there's the nerds who think that, no, the real power is with the media, with technology. They base their ideas largely around the words of Marshall McLuhan, who at the time had coined his famous phrase, "The medium is the message." That statement really is all about how it's not so much what's on TV that's important, but that we are watching TV. That really does more that says more about our society than what we watch, really. So these hippies, think, well, let's start our own media then. And these become the first real nerds who, start dreaming about creating their own platform for this. This is often called the birth of the Californian ideology, where you find hippie Enlightenment ideals and hippie anarchist ideas mixed up with laissez-faire economic ideas, where you find this real odd hybrid of hippies who say, yeah, let's be anarchists by building a new system, so they can start creating their own media system. I mean, they even look like hippies, I always think. When you look at these early technologists, they just look like hippies. And to me, when I first realized that nerds really were hippies, a lot of things fell into place. They're all about sharing and about free, libre, open source software, as you well know. And it's this very much this anarchist movement still there, very much about sharing, about peace, love, and happiness in a way. And of course, it's still about sex. The nerd stereotype is that we think about sex a lot. So I find this, comical, but I find it's an interesting idea. And then things progress. Vannevar Bush wrote in 1945 in this article, As We May Think. This was a period when the Second World War was over, and there was a huge scientific machine that just created the Manhattan Project. And they were trying to look for other things to do, to keep having the funding to create new research, to have money, to have bread on their plates. And he said, well, whenever logical progresses of thought are employed, that is, whenever thought for a time runs along an accepted groove, there's an opportunity for the machine. And he was very much about trying to use all this intellectual might to create a more automated society in a way, to see how computers and how calculation could create this new society. And this is really a starting point in a way, which continues in this path that I'm kind of narrating here. Then we get Gordon Moore. I'm sure you all know him, one of the founders of Intel, if I'm correct. And he had this idea that computers would get faster and faster, that chips would get cheaper and cheaper, I think I can kind of go fast on this one because I'm sure you all know this. Familiar ground. So in 1964, this computer cost $1 million. Then in his theory of computer class formation, he says every 10 years, computers get a lot cheaper and a lot smaller. So in 1970, you might have a computer that cost, or 1960 that cost $1 million. Then 10 years later, it might cost 100,000, 10,000. 10 years later again, 1,000, and now in theory we are at the time where our laptop should cost $100, which was of course Nicholas Negroponte's claim. I mean, here it's already becoming a desktop, really. 1984. So there we kind of get to the more nerdy part, though this already was. My own research. As a researcher, I was working at HKU, which is a higher art school in Utrecht here in the Netherlands. And we were trying to set up a new study which was all about ubiquitous computing and pervasive computing. And we were trying to teach these new students how to create this world that we thought would arrive. I mean, if computers kept getting smaller and smaller, cheaper and cheaper, then in 10, 20 years, the logical progression would be that computers would be pretty much everywhere. I mean, they could be in your cup. I mean, that's the whole idea of ubiquitous computing. Computers are everywhere, and they're all connected to each other. And we thought, it would be a great idea if we could teach kids to design this, and what should we teach them? And we found that the more we were trying to create a curriculum for them, we really had a hard time to turn these ideas of this future that Mark Weiser said was coming. He really is a name that I'll drop a lot. To create a curriculum for these people that really worked. I mean, to say, okay, I'm standing from the classroom, what should I teach these kids? What should be on my board? We found it very difficult to turn all this ephemerical ideology of him into something useful. Here he is, Mark Weiser. And, well, his ubiquitous computing vision can be a little bit digressed in three ways. He first of all says computers should be spatial. We shouldn't dive into computers. The computer should be everywhere, and they should sense where we are. So there has to be a lot of sensors, and they have to understand us. They have to understand our body language, and that will enhance our interaction with computers, because when we have this, right now we are only using our hands and our eyes, and if we use the rest of our body, we have way more bandwidth, as it were, to connect with all these computers. Secondly, he says things should be invisible. They should be away. They should go away from us. They should leave us do our daily things, and they should be invisible butlers to us. And the third thing that's really important to know about ubiquitous computing, and that's the most important thing, is really that it is a vision. It is not so much a logical extrapolation or a theory that says this is how a programming language can be made better. If we implement this, it'll become better. This is very much way beyond that. This is a vision for the next 10, 20 years. And as such, in my thesis and in this talk, we'll see that this has a lot of implications. Visions have their own little niggles, as it were. The big thing that Mark Weiser was afraid of was information overload. I mean, it's pretty self-evident for him. If you get more computers, if you get more sensors, there's going to be a lot more information. If there's going to be a lot more information, how the hell are people going to deal with this? This is going to be so much, we'll have a big problem. That was one of his big main reasons for creating this idea that of the invisibility part of his idea. These computers should take away, they should do the processing for us. If there's so much information, they should take a slice of that. They should become extelligence. They should think for us in a way. So he wants to automate daily life through invisible technology. And there's the intelligence part. And you really see how he envisioned that we're going from traditional computing, which was desktop computing at the time. You can go in two directions. You can say, I'm going to make mobile computing, which would be the mobile phone. And that's changed the level of mobility, but not the level of sensing of our environment. The other thing is pervasive computers, where you get environments like Cave, and which are just a room like this would be full of sensors and it would know where we all are. But combine the two and you get ubiquitous computing. You get this pervasive, everywhere computers that are highly mobile, highly attached to our persons and integrated into things. But I believe there's a big discrepancy between this dream that he had and reality. And as we were researching this and as we were trying to create this curriculum, we kind of came to a few things that we found were dubious and that we found were more and more researchers and theorists had also seen. The first problem really with Weiser's idea of the future and the idea that computers can be invisible and everywhere and understand us is that they assume that the world is easy to analyze. If you can analyze the world, you can create systems that automate parts of it. But it turned out, as Lucy Sugman explains, that it's really not that easy. Lucy Sugman was a co-researcher at Xerox PARC, where Mark Weiser was working. And they were working on a smart copying machine. And this copying machine would take what the design team was trying to do. They were trying to analyze people's goals when they went to copy something. So you'd have the machine, they'd be like, well, people would often want to make 4 copies of something. So we should automate that and try to understand in a menu what people want to do. But what Lucy Sugman found when she went with this team and did the research, that this hardly ever worked because John would be copying his 4 copies, but then Carol from accounting would come, oh, I really have to do something quickly, and can you please go? And he was like, yeah, sure, And then the situation of it changed, and that kind of threw all the automated plans of these people in the water. So this is what she calls situated actions. She says people are highly situated, and these situations are highly changeable and highly complex, and very difficult to predict. Yeah. This for me is a good example of that idea. It always makes me smile. I mean, we hardly ever, this is something that I can see a group of nerds or a group of designers thinking about. You think, oh yeah, we'll make this there and then it'll be fine. But you don't see this. There's so many things that you don't see as a designer, which is perfectly normal and we're only human, but one of the points in this lecture I'm trying to make is that we often forget this. So what Lucy Sugman basically said is social reality is, and what we found is social reality is so complex and very difficult to predict. And this makes the idea of computers being everywhere and helping us really quite difficult because they have such a hard time understanding us. I always take the example of you're sitting in a lounge chair and you're reading a good book and you look up and think, oh yeah, that's brilliant. And then this intelligent lamp thinks, oh, he's looking at me, that means I have to turn on, and he turns on, and you're completely out of your idiom. It's this kind of difficulty that you could imagine. I mean, the world really is very messy and out of focus. That's always what I find very funny when I was working a lot, because I also have a very technical background. Often you would work with people in a team and we're going to make this application, and or you work with people who are working at a data center, and we're going to make this great system, it's going to be high speed, it's going to be awesome, it's going to be great, it's going to replace our current system. And they say, oh, yeah, you talk on a bit and they say, so how's your current system? Oh man, it's horrible, it's full of bugs, and it's pieced together by duct tape. And I always found it odd that they never made the connect that, once their current system was also a grandiose project, but had turned to duct tapiness. And of course, their current project will probably also end up being moderated, getting in situations that are you couldn't predict, where you'll need duct tape. Oddly enough, funnily enough, Weiser recognizes this very much. He says the solution is in the future. He says something that a lot of people who predict the future say, what futurists often do. They say, well, it is a problem, but we'll get there in the next 5-10 years. People will really figure this out. And that's how it always goes. And within 5-10 years, we'll have the solution. And you often find that futurists use this kind of talk. They often say in 5-10 years, we'll have the solution. And what will start is a new era. Futurists often talk about new eras and new times, new ages. and a revolution. And that's how we get to the next problem, which is the expectation horizon. Graham McCracken says that the future is where society safeguards her ideals. So these ideas that we have about the future are highly idealized versions of what we want. Like when I watched Star Trek, it really was, you know, an idealized version of the world that would never, ever really come to pass. We find, according to philosopher Rein de Wil, that every society does this. They create images of the future which are at once unattainable, yet claim to be inevitable. Mark Weiser would say it's inevitable this is going to happen, but at the same time we find that if you really look at the pragmatic level, the practical level, it'll never happen. And this is because of this highly idealized notion is where society saves that. And you often find that the futurists have two notions of telling us about this. They'll say, either they'll call it an alluring future, which says, oh, it's going to be great if you do what I say, or they're going to describe it as a storming future that's storming at us, and it'll be a dystopia unless you do what I say. But soon the prediction becomes unmaintainable. If you keep saying, yes, this really is coming around the corner, it's just around the corner, next 5 to 10 years this will happen, you know, you can say this a couple of times, but after a while people will not take you seriously anymore. So when Weiser in 1990 said, oh, this is really going to happen, and right now we're in 2009, and this really hasn't happened yet in the way that he predicted, then it becomes more and more difficult to take him seriously, and you find more and more people like me and Paul Durisch who are trying to say, well, let's look at this a bit more rationally. So what we often find is this kind of life cycle in these theories of the future, these visions. A new one will inevitably take this one's place. It will become very popular. I'm thinking this might be the singularity in our case, which is basically a return to artificial intelligence idealism. What we also find is that the old one is soon forgotten. We all remember virtual reality, and we were all believing that that we would, in the 80s, we really believed that we would do this. This was going to happen. We were all going to live inside the screen, and we often forget how really we believed this. I mean, right now this looks funny, but this was dead serious back then. Yeah, these visions of the future, they're not just debunked. I mean, they're really forgotten. And Vincent Moscow writes in his book, The Digital Sublime, how there is indeed a remarkable, almost willful historical amnesia about technology, particularly when the talk turns to communication and information technology. And so because they often, according to him, they promise revolution. And this revolution aspect is so important because where in evolution, history really forms the basis of a new idea, of new connections and new technologies. Futurists often talk about revolution because that kind of wipes the slate clean so easily. You can forget about all the old stuff. The new future is going to be really awesome. You know, this new thing is going to be great. So Bell and Durisch kind of sum it up as saying that the problems of ubiquitous computing essentially are framed as implementation issues that are someone else's problem, to be cleaned up afterwards as part of the broad march of technology. But, so I don't believe that we'll ever get to this ubiquitous computing idea of Weiser or anything related to that idea of computers being everywhere and helping us out in that level. But what if we could? What if we could create this global system and they would all work together and there wouldn't be 10 standards and it would all be great? Would we even want it? That's another big question, which I may find even more interesting. And this is kind of where things get a bit more political as well. According to Weiser, who recognized this himself, he says, the issue is about simplicity versus control. Later on, 10 years after his first prediction, he says, the problem, while often couched in terms of privacy, is really one of control. If the computational system is invisible as well as extensive, it becomes hard to know what is controlling what is connected to what, where information is flowing, how it is being used, what is broken versus what is working correctly, but unhelpfully, and what are the consequences of any given action, including simply walking into a room. Maintaining simplicity and control simultaneously is still one of the major open questions facing ubiquitous computing research. So here we find that Weiser's idea originally was to take care of this information overload by creating computers that will help us create a calm environment. In his most important paper, The Computer of the 21st Century. And here again, if you look back, you find this idea of the 21st century, a new era, forget the old stuff. He talks about computing environments becoming like a forest. You'll walk through it, and instead of it giving you the jitters and making you anxious and being too much information, it'll be calming and soothing. That's what he would like to have. But Billing and Cordingley in 2006, in one of their articles, said, what the risk here is that calm computing really turns into passive computing. And I'll go into that a bit. Like, designers often talk about making interfaces that feel natural. I'm sure I've talked to these designers, it has to feel natural. But of course, interfaces are not at all natural. They're highly cultural. And if we don't teach users how to use interfaces, how to use computers, their own frame of reference for what is natural, their own ways of trying to understand what the designer meant by a certain menu button or something, or shrinks. So it's very important to keep users on their toes, to teach them new things, new interfaces, new ways of understanding of technology. You really have to push them. But this is really not the case in ubiquitous computing, where people are more about trying to create the ultimate usability environment, where, you know, if something has less buttons, that would be great. Like an iPod has less buttons, that works well. Imagine if it had no buttons, then it would be perfect. So Lucy Zugman again says in her book, for practical purposes, user interface designers have long held the view that machines ideally should be self-explanatory, in the broad sense that their operation should be discoverable without extensive training, from information provided on or through the machine itself. On this view, the degree to which an artifact is self-explanatory is just the extent to which someone examining the artifact is able to reconstruct the designer's intentions regarding its use. So here we find this idea that if something should be natural, you need a smart user. But what ubiquitous computing tries to do is to dumb down users, to say, no, we're going to make it so easy, you really don't have to learn anything, it's going to be automatic, even though we already saw that that was impossible. But that's the idea. And I think that's very dangerous to try to teach your users to be dumb, to not question technology, to not play with it. So it's very ironic, because in a way this is a reintroduction of this fear of information overload. But this time it's coming from the hackers and the nerds themselves. And they really also believe in a way in this information overload, and that users should be protected from this, even though hackers should know better. I mean, information is not something that is unsurmountable. You learn to live with it. For instance, Hiltz and Turoff, in their research in 1985, did research into this about how people got used to technology, and they found that people really create filters quite quickly. For instance, in one of their cases, they were testing users of information systems and found that within 100 hours, no one was scared at all anymore. They were all fine, and you know, basically it needs a little time, and then you're fine. Then we get to technological paternalism, which is an outcrop of this in a way. Spiekerman and Paulus in 2006 wrote about, in one of the articles about, they explain what paternalism is. They say, paternalism is a situation where there's someone who's being paternal and someone who's being paternal too. And they say the victim's freedoms are limited. The situation is perceived as authoritarian, but the victim believes this is better for his or herself. And the victim voluntarily undergoes this. So this is a situation where you believe, okay, so this technology is really complex, but I'll believe that the designers know best. And they say there's a new version which happens when technology becomes so widespread and ubiquitous, which there's a danger of technological paternalism, which is the same. The systems tell us what to do, and we believe that's better. But there's an extra level, which is that even the voluntary nature of it is taken away to a certain extent. For instance, Saab made some cars, test cars, where they put in these breathalyzers into the car. And the car would only start if you would first take an alcohol test. And of course, the idea is very noble, but of course, it's very difficult to foresee situations in which you might be driving with your dad, and you might have had something to drink, but not too much, but a little bit of a limit, and you hit a car, something happens, and you're shit, I'm in the middle of nowhere, I need to get to the hospital, and your car won't let you. It's still perfectly fine. You could drive him to hospital if your car would let you, but your car won't let you. So these are situations where designers who predict uses are really inadequate will never ever be able to predict the different uses, which might lead to interesting scenarios. But of course, this ubiquitous idea is still very popular with nerds, because it's a form of heroic engineering, especially because nerds will say how things are going and how they will be used. It feels very attractive. In that sense, ubiquitous computing is very much a technological determinist vision. McKay, Young, and Bennion describe it as technological determinism is this notion that technology is parachuted into society and really changes it. It has an impact. Often you'll find people talk about technology saying the impact it has on our society. But this is a very dubious idea. This is one side of the coin, because you could also say that technology isn't something that's been pushed on us. We take it in. Like, for instance, with SMS, we are the people who decided, hey, this is useful, and we took it and made it our own. So this is very much an ideology debate about how you look at technology. And McKay, Young, and Bennion in 1991 explained that if you look at technology as something that just happens to you, as something that is forced upon you, then clearly such an approach engenders a passivity with regard to technology. It's going to happen anyway, and technological determinism diverts attention from such questions as the relationships of technology to human need. Implicit in technological determinism is that there is no choice about technology which we have. So why would you create, for instance, a privacy law if technology is going to happen anyway? And you often find this certain defeatist attitude around technology. It's going to happen anyway, and I have nothing to hide, and it's going to happen anyway, what can we do about it? Which, in a sense, creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where, because no one does anything, nothing really happens. That's one example I always like is the bathtub, to create this notion of the black box that ubiquitous computing wants to create. Imagine this is a highly futuristic bathtub, and it knows when you come home, and it knows your patterns of work and when you like to take baths. And it's learned this over a little while. But one night you come home and you're, oh yes, I want a bath, and you expect the bathtub to be full and ready for you. But it's not full. And you're like, shit, what's going on? I mean, you wouldn't know what was wrong. I mean, it could be that the water's not there. It could be that the data that holds your patterns is corrupted. It could be that the water sensor thinks it's already full. You don't know. And that's the problem when you want to create invisible systems, that you create this extreme black box environment where it's very difficult for the end user to understand anything that's going on. Like we said, that kind of makes them dumb in a way. So I think nerds are a bit arrogant in that sense. I find it dubious that we do believe that we know best and that we think that we can create systems that will work for everybody. So what does happen? I think that while we dream about revolutions, the real future evolves right under our noses. In a sense, what Mark Weiser claimed has happened. Computers have become smaller and they have become ubiquitous. It's just that they're not invisible at all, because no one wants that. People love the iPhone, people love the gadgets, they love the things it can do. People love playing with it, tinkering with it. I mean, this is, and it's not invisible at all. I mean, metaphorically, you could say, people put their phones on the table and when they get into a bar just to show it off. They don't want invisible phones. So, could ubiquitous computing ever happen? Well, in our research, we came to the conclusion that there had to be a web or a 2.0 version of the ubiquitous computing ideal, just like there had been in the artificial intelligence world. There has to be a paradigm shift in how people look at it. For instance, with artificial intelligence, there was first this idea that we're going to model the brain. If we make it big enough, we'll just copy it. But later on, that never worked, and people said, okay, well, what if we took the bottom-up approach? And that's what they're working on now, by creating small systems that will work together and then create some kind of intelligence. For ubiquitous computing, if we want to continue with ubiquitous computing, we'll have to take this same type of bottom-up approach. we'll have to stop thinking that we know best how to create these huge systems, and designers will have to take into account that people are actually rather smart and could work these systems pretty well, and we should take them as partners instead of people who are below us in the sense that we are designing for. Another way that we could work, and that's already working, is we just keep the system small. If you create one room that's very much decked out with technology and sensors, and that you know the situation better, then there really will be times when thought runs along an accepted groove, as we saw. And then you really could predict this, but often, if you make it too big, it won't work. And we have to stop wanting technology to be invisible. We really have to stop doing that. And I find that the mobile phone is such a great example. Belen Durish went to Singapore to do some research on this. And what they saw was that people there use their phone for pretty much everything. There's numbers on the sides of houses, and you ring them, and that belongs to a taxi service who then immediately knows where you are and will come pick you up in no time. To a certain extent, that is really smart environment. That's smart, but it's just not what we envisioned. It has become something totally different. So what Belen Durish in their research claim is that our suggestion that ubiquitous computing already here, they say this, they say ubiquitous computing is really already here, but just not as we expected it to be. It's a mobile phone. And they say our suggestion that ubiquitous computing is already here in the form of densely available computing and communication resources is sometimes met with an objection that these technologies remain less than ubiquitous in the sense that Weiser suggested. Mobile telephony, after all, offers widespread coverage, but is neither truly ubiquitous nor truly seamless. Incompatible standards, spotty regional coverage, etc. They seem like obstacles that we must overcome, that we still must overcome before the ubiquitous computing vision can be realized. But postulating a seamless infrastructure is a strategy whereby the messy present can be ignored. Although infrastructure is always evenly distributed, always messy. An indefinitely postponed ubiquitous future is one that never need take account of this complexity. So by creating this vision of this perfect technological system that's right around the corner, we can ignore the messiness of our real technological environment, which, oddly enough, I find way more interesting. I find it very interesting how people use mobile phones in unprotected ways, and I find this could be a strength, and I think something that we really should research, as is luckily being done. So what should we take away? I mean, we look at this and we think it's funny, you know, flying through the sky in the year 2000, but we keep doing this. We keep thinking when new technology arrives that, or we create new visions that this is going to be great and it's going to solve our current technological mayhem and our current messy situation. We keep thinking it's going to be this awesome situation. It's going to change so much. Like TV will mean the end of war, and we'll get the paperless office, and we will all live in cyberspace. Time after time we find this highly idealized notions of what our future is going to look like, and time after time we find that they never happen. They keep coming in the next 5 to 10 years. And I'll go on Slashdot and I'll find someone who says, yes, in 10 years we'll have artificial intelligence. And I keep going, shut up. So that really is something that I'm very critical of and still see a lot. For instance, Hans Moravec, who was a researcher, coined this idea of transhumanism, which in all sense is basically the idea of the Borg, that we will become more than humans. We will upload our brain into satellites orbiting the Earth and then explore the galaxy in technological spaceships. And he really believes this is very viable and it's going to happen really, really soon. And it's really no different from ideas that are very popular right now, which is the singularity, which is basically artificial intelligence ideas rehashed. This notion that soon artificial intelligence will be so smart that it can not only that we don't have to build it anymore, it will build newer versions of itself that are smarter and smarter and smarter, and then we'll have an explosion of intelligence, and we humans will be left in the dust. So again, it's this idea of a future that's around the corner, which has both scary parts and very blissful parts, and we love it. You know, this is where we keep our ideals. I mean, it could be great. Am I a pessimist? Do I believe dreaming is bad? No, of course not. I mean, we do have to have dreams, and we are the myth-making species. But I do believe that we can be a little bit more realistic about this future and understand that we keep doing this and then take it with a larger grain of salt. I mean, nerds like to dream. And here we are with this again. I mean, I'm always trying to find my way in between pessimism and you know, killing dreams and having dreams and trying to see where it could all go and what could happen. But mostly I try to be realistic about it, and I try to find, okay, what parts of these ideals can we really believe and what not? I mean, we really are going to have computers everywhere, probably, if the oil doesn't run out. But it will just not look as we predicted now. And if we make a prediction now about something else, about how it's going to look in 20 years, we'll probably have it wrong. So getting back to my original problem stuff that I was talking about, I mean, we have so many problems. Will technology save us? I don't think so. I think that's very much an idealized idea of what technology will do. Again, it's a larger version where we believe technology is the thing that will save us. You know, I'm not going to stop buying stuff. I'm going to buy more efficient stuff. Yes, I'll still have a second car, but it'll be hybrid, so I won't feel so guilty. And that's all thanks to technology. But we have to realize that technology is only as good as the people who make it, and you know, we're only human. So here I kind of come to the future of the future, part 3. How do I make sense of this myself in my ideas of these problems? If technology is not the answer to our problems of handling the world and its problems, then what, you know? I mean, it could be the people themselves. For instance, we could all learn to consume less and love each other and not make wars and all this stuff. Looking back at my own psychological stuff, I don't believe this is ever going to happen. I mean, we are wasteful, but that's fine. Should we become neo-Luddites? Should we just cease with technology at all and go the other way and say, you know, we're going to live on the farms? No, that's also not an option, of course. There are too many people, and it's never going to happen. Should we have a smaller population? That might save a lot of trouble. But of course, that again is also not an option. I mean, how do you get there? So what I believe was an interesting option would be decadence. Should we just say, fuck it, and just say, okay, I'll have an extra plastic bag from the cashier at the supermarket register? Should we just go and party? I find this option more and more alluring, personally. Because all the other options I don't really believe in anymore. But that's another story. My official statement is that I don't know. Does technology solve more problems than it creates? I really don't know, and I'd love to talk to anyone who wants to have a beer with me later on and talk about it. So ask yourself, will technology save us? That was my presentation. Thank you.
Fascinating stuff. So I think we have 10 minutes here for questions before the eminent Roger Dingledine begins.
Yeah, let's make it a nice debate. I mean, hit me. Go ahead.
Maybe one more time.
Hi. I find it a very interesting presentation because the next one, Future Shock, is all about the singularity and the scarcity. So it gives a good
I'm definitely going to watch that one.
So everybody to Monty Hall at 9 o'clock. That's actually what I wanted to say. Very good job.
Great.
Do we have questions? Questions?
Yeah. I'd like to start by pointing out that I'm still waiting for my flying car.
Yeah.
One of those promises that's never happened. I'm also interested what you think about something that I was very interested in 10 years ago was wearable computing.
Viral computing.
Wearable. That you would wear glasses that just projected in your eye, and you would have a computer on your belt, etc. Well, the computer on your belt is no problem. I've got an iPhone with me, which is probably powerful enough for that sort of stuff. But the technology, the in and output technology, is basically the problem. Mm-hmm. How can you use your computer. You can make tiny computers, but how can you use your computer in a way that does not take up all your attention? Because that's basically the problem. When you use a computer, you have to use all your attention. That's kind
Sorry, you have to speak up a bit.
Yeah, when you're using, you have to focus on the computer. You're actively using it, and the idea behind wearable computing is that you can use it automatically. It becomes part of your environment. And I was wondering, is that also one of those nerdy dreams that you don't think will ever come true?
I don't think that will ever come true, no. I think, like I said, I think people are a lot smarter than you think, and they like being in control of their phone and all this kind of thing. And people underestimate the simplicity versus control issue. They really want to be in control. People aren't dumb in that sense. They want to be in control of their phone, yeah. So I don't think they'll ever, you can automate certain things, of course, but if I see where you're heading with this question, I think that people will always have buttons on their devices attached to their belt.
Oh, one here.
Where I see you're making predictions again, in a sense. And also it's rather suspicious that you're kind of extrapolating the current situation, like more of today. So computers that require all attention, computers that are incompatible. Why not in 10 years again something else?
All right, I see what you mean. I'm saying that in 10 years we'll have computers that will still have buttons. But yeah, I understand what you mean, but I think that this is because I look at the human nature. I think human nature is such that it will always want buttons. I don't believe this to be something that I predict in that way, that I believe will definitely happen. I mean, I don't know what form it's going to take, for instance. I don't know what kind of computers we'll have in 10 years, but I know that we'll still want to have control of them. The simplicity versus control issue will still be there, and we won't have magically found a solution for something that knows what I want magically, so it doesn't have any buttons. I mean, that will never happen. We'll always need to have methods of controlling our technology. In what sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. This has happened, but my point is that we shouldn't indulge the user too much in their drive for simple things. I think we should continue to teach them the complexity of technology and not dumb them down. But yes, of course, there will always be the universal machine that is a computer will always have different levels of layers around it for different types of people who are good with technology. Hackers can get really down to the core and change it, but people who are normal users will always need some kind of abstraction level. That's logical, but all I'm saying is that we should always try to get people to get closer to this core, not indulge in their just let it go idea. No, we should always teach them these things.
Hello. That works? Okay, closer? Good. 2 questions, or one and common nice talk, by the way. Haven't you realized that in the past any prediction about the development of computer systems proved to be wrong, or most of them? And the other thing is, I want to comment, don't you think there is a gap between people that are technophile as us and people that are not technophile, like our politicians, for example? And how do you think the technophile people that are becoming more and more in charge of this planet are going to be capable of actually ruling it, instead of having the non-technophile people that just plain don't know how the technology works anymore, are doing stupid things and eventually push the wrong button, like now happening in Germany with the internet censorship and shit?
Excellent point. When I was kind of in chapter 2, as it were, when I was talking about when it became political, when I was saying that it's very much about keeping users dumb in a way. A lot of this idealism around ubiquitous computing creates the situation where you create this barrier between users and designers and you really create this heroic engineer, you know, this guy who knows everything, and they're going to set up this world and you're going to love it. It's going to be a theme park. And I do feel that that is highly politically laden, and that this ideology is used to create a world in which nerds are king, where we rule. I mean, that's great on the one hand, but on the other hand, like I said, I don't believe we can do it. I don't think we'll ever be able to deliver on that promise. We'll never understand situations well enough to predict them.
Something very interesting, actually, that I'm just going to butt in here, because the nerds in charge thing actually has happened before. If you look at the Soviet Union in the in the 20s, 30s, through to the 60s and 70s, in fact, the great majority of policy was actually set by essentially technocrats. And what you ended up with was this very weird state where the engineer, there was effectively a cult of the engineer, and the engineers ended up essentially running everything. And they created a system that in the end became bizarrely ritualistic, which nobody actually really understood, and then subsequently collapsed. So I mean, you know, I think we need to be extremely cautious when we, you know, try and put this idea together that in fact, you know, nerds are destined to rule. I mean, it's the only upside I can see to that is that being a member of the new ruling class, you know, I can abrogate all power to myself and crush everybody else under my iron boot.
Yeah. Agreed. It's a great example. Thank you very much for that.
So, yeah, I think we've got time enough for one more question, if anyone's got one. Anybody? No more questions?
Otherwise, I can tell you what I believe is a great future. When I was talking about decadence, there's a part I like about decadence idea, which is just something that I find funny. I was drinking one night with a friend, and he said, let's go decadence, and the aliens will love it. And what he meant was that when we have all partied out on this planet, there will only be beautiful columns left, beautiful dead buildings, beautiful leftovers, beautiful ruins. And as a part artist, I love this idea that we should all focus on art and create the most beautiful ruins imaginable, so that one day aliens can come to our dead planet and see the most beautiful civilization they've ever thought they could see. So let's be decadent, let's all drink and be merry, and see you guys later.
Excellent. Well, bang on time. Well done. Right, so thank you very much, Timon, and we look forward to talking to you a bit later, hopefully.